Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos and I'm so theatrically minded that when I hear the words "the rake's progress," I always think, well, surely that's mostly down towards the orchestra pit. And we will be hearing more about the raking of stages later in today's episode. Well, what is today's episode all about? Well, if you're British, you've probably heard in the last few weeks the sad news of the passing, at the age of 96, of Nicholas Parsons. Now, Nicholas Parsons is one of those people who has been in British cultural life seemingly forever. He had a career of over 70 years, which is certainly not to be sniffed at, and whilst wildly mocked and teased throughout much of that career, he was also much loved. And I think we can genuinely say that he was a national treasure. And certainly everyone I know has been very sad to hear that he'd eventually died at 96. But my word, he continued working until the very end. Not only was he famous for his television presenting of quiz shows like Sale of the Century, and of course his hosting of Just a Minute, a radio programme for over 50 years, he was also an actor. In fact, as you'll hear in this conversation, an actor first. All the other things were subsidiary interests in his long and varied career. And it was in his role as actor that he occasionally found himself working in musical theatre. Now, he didn't have a huge history in musicals, but what he did have was very impressive, because he was in the Rocky Horror Show, he was in Into the Woods with Julia McKenzie in London in the late 1980s, and he'd also appeared in Charlie Girl in a 1980s revival of that charming and not often remembered British musical, as well as a handful of other things here and there. I had the privilege of interviewing Nicholas at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2007. He was at the time 84 years old and was already by that time a fixture at the Fringe as the host of his annual show Nicholas Parsons' Happy Hour, which was a kind of live chat show with other people appearing at the Fringe. In 2007, when I interviewed him, it was in its 8th year, and it ran for 10 more years because he was still doing it as late as 2018. Sadly, in 2019's Fringe, although it was advertised, ill health prevented him from appearing. But that's still a 19-year run of shows. Not at all bad for a man in his 80s and 90s. And before we hear the interview, I think I also need to stress my own personal gratitude to Nicholas Parsons, because 2007 was very much the early days of Musical Talk, and certainly the early days of my appearances on Musical Talk. At that stage, I hadn't done a great deal of interviewing. I'd spoken to the late Jerry Herman over the telephone with Nick Hudson, but that's a different kind of interview. With Nicholas, I was doing it face to face, and what's more, I asked him to do the interview with me almost cold, in the sense that I more or less doorstepped him in the streets of Edinburgh. It was my first ever Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and I had really only been in that marvellous city for a few minutes when I and the friend I was with spotted Nicholas Parsons on the pavement. Not an uncommon occurrence in Edinburgh. You see celebrities all over the place. And my response to seeing Nicholas Parsons, someone who was a household name, was exactly the same as it had always been for me, which was to notice it and then walk on without making any contact. But there was something in the back of my head that said, Musical Talk needs you to do interviews. And so, literally, about 10 paces after I'd walked on, I turned to my friend and I said, I'm just going to be a minute. And then I retraced my steps and caught up with Nicholas Parsons and introduced myself. It seems such a cheeky thing to do, although I've done it many times since. But that was the first time. It was the first time I'd had the courage to go up to somebody famous and ask them if I could interview them. And he was so very generous. He actually gave me his mobile telephone number and asked me to call him later so that we could make arrangements. And that's exactly what we did. I mean, that's amazing, really, to be someone that famous and then still give out your personal mobile telephone number to a complete stranger. Now, listening back to this interview for today's broadcast, I'm struck by two things. The first is the interesting nature of the anecdotes that Nicholas shares with us. It's not everyone who can move from memories of Cyd Charisse and personal conversations with Stephen Sondheim to talking about roller skating on a stage. And the second thing is my own embarrassment at my own involvement in this conversation. Nicholas Parsons remains the professional entertainer that he had always been. But this was my first interview. In the time between making the appointment and meeting Nicholas, I had done all the necessary research. But I can hear a whole number of verbal tics in the conversation, which I am not now proud of. I do say, if I may say so, really too many times, and I've edited out quite a lot of them. And also I can hear that I haven't really mastered the art of having a conversation. I know how to keep a conversation going, but not how to explore some of the more interesting byways and tangents. Fortunately, Nicholas makes up for my weaknesses by being genuinely and continually interesting. And it's not just me saying that. You'll hear that now. So let's go back all the way to the very early days of musical talk and the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in the year 2007, and a conversation I held with the amazing, the legendary Nicholas Parsons, early one morning in the Pleasance courtyard. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Well, I'm delighted to have the opportunity of speaking to one of Britain's national treasures, if I may say.
You're too kind, Thomas.
It's Nicholas Parsons, who's here at the Edinburgh Fringe this year with his splendid show for the 7th year, I think.
It's the 8th year, actually,
Is it
Thomas.
the 8th year?
Doesn't matter, though. Doesn't matter.
And
you lose count of time after a bit, especially at my age.
Well, forgive me, I have to say you have a spring in your step, if you don't mind me saying, and a flamboyant elegance as well, which is rare these days.
Well, yes, probably a lot of the people on the Fringe do incline to dress down a bit, whereas I, as an old-fashioned performer, been in the business for nearly 60 years, I worked out the other day. I mean, I dress up to flatter my audience because it's traditional the way you did. You went out there and you always looked your best when you faced an audience.
One of the aspects of your career which people don't talk about nearly so much, and I think perhaps they should, is your long career as an actor. You started in repertory in Kent, I think, some years ago, and discovered a taste for comedy.
Well, I think I had a taste for comedy as a child. And that's what irritated my mother so much, because she was terrified I might become an actor and did everything possible to stop me. So I became an engineer first to please my family and did 5 years on Clydebank, and I did a little bit at Glasgow University. But all the time I was entertaining and getting away and doing amateur work and doing impersonations. But you just mentioned then about my time as an actor. I mean, what I always say, it's a terribly British thing, particularly English as opposed to Scottish thing, when you say as if you were an actor. I am an actor. I've always been an actor. I will always be an actor. But I am an actor who does lots of different things. Now, in America, if you do lots of different things and have a diverse talent, you are respected for that. They're impressed with it. In this country, they're a bit unsettled by it. They're almost suspicious of you. And so, though I trained as an actor once I'd given up engineering, I did my stint in rep for nearly 2.5 years at Bromley in Kent, playing a different part, a different play. But always one knew that one's particular forte, or 50 even, or 60 if you like, was comedy and character roles. And it is in that area that I've evolved and developed ever since. And going into stand-up at the Windmill Theatre, but before that doing a lot of cabaret, because in the 50s and 60s there was a lot of cabaret in the West End of London, a lot of cabaret venues, restaurants, dining restaurants, smart ones, had a single artist doing cabaret material. That sort of material was rather smart and clever, and it's disappeared now. Television has destroyed it completely. But what television's done actually is brought the two, not extremes, but the two sides of entertainment. One being the music hall, where most sort of working class people went, and the other being legitimate theatre, as we called it, where most of the more discerning public went. Those, of course, you've got the crossover all the time. But as a result of radio comedy and then television comedy, they began to realise there was a great crossover. And people who'd never been to a music hall in their lives suddenly realised that music hall entertainment was superb. And those who'd never been to a legitimate play suddenly realised that plays were tremendous fun and great entertainment. So the result is it killed off the sort of work in between, which was cabaret and a lot of others. So now we have stand-up comedy, and you have comedy clubs, and things like the Windmill Theatre, which was exceptional and unique, which was like a little review show really, has disappeared. Intimate review, which I did a great deal of in the 50s, which was a form of entertainment in the theatre in the West End of London, that's gone. There's a great tradition of reviews, those great, in the 30s, the great Charlotte reviews, and the other reviews that Noel Coward and others wrote and did, and then you had the Diversions, it was called, then the wonderful one during the war with Hermione Gingold and Hermione Badley, and probably names for only the older people listening would conjure with. But it existed. That's gone. It's disappeared. But I have moved on and adapted my talents, such as they were, to whatever was the current trend. And so when I went into the Rocky Horror Show, I was always amazed when people said to me, "Oh, I was quite surprised to see you in that show. It's a departure for you." I said, "No, it's going back to my roots, because I'm an actor. I'm a theatre performer." So doing a musical show was with music as opposed to sort of drama. But that was me doing what comes naturally, as opposed to quiz shows and game shows, which was something I never trained for. You don't train for it. It's just that I had that facility and could adapt my talent and technique in order to encompass that work.
And thank you for mentioning the Rocky Horror, because I did actually want to move on particularly to your quite extensive career in musicals as an actor. Yeah. I'm going to mention actually a film you did in 1967 called The Ghost Goes Gear.
Oh my God,
with the Spencer Davis Group.
That's the Spencer Davis Group. Was it a Spencer Davis trio? No, it was a group, wasn't it? Yes. I mean, this was one of those disasters which you remember with dread, because it was going to be a short film on a limited budget, because they're paying a lot of money probably to the Spencer Davis Group, and I was the producer. The character I played was the producer, and we had 2 weeks location somewhere in the countryside in England, and I'm not joking, it literally rained every single day. It not only rained, if you view the phrase, it just pissed down all the time, and everybody was drenched, and they couldn't get all the filming done. They did what they possibly could. They adapted bits and pieces, and they probably got most of the musical stuff done. I mean, the poor man who directed it disappeared from sight complete, as far as I know. And I thought this was a film that was going to be dead and buried and never see the light of day. Until one time, I was doing a cabaret show once, and they said, "I saw you in a film the other day." And I said, "The Ghost Goes Gear." I said, "My God," but they didn't film it all. An awful lot was never put onto celluloid. They said, "Well, it did seem a bit disjointed." It did seem a bit of a sort of hiccup, jumping from one thing to the next. But I suppose they spent their money, and I thought with the name of the Spencer Davis Group, they could sell it a bit. So it didn't exactly get released. It escaped.
And then you went from that. You've done a thousand things, but your next, well-known foray into musical theatre, I think, is Charlie Girl in about 1986, the revival with Cyd Charisse. Is that correct?
That's right. I'd done bits and pieces of musical theatre before that, because I'd done a lot of review, because there's a lot of music in review. I was doing musical numbers in reviews, which I mentioned earlier on, in the 50s particularly. But the first major West End music I did was Charlie Girl. And what was, to my mind, rather amusing, I played the part that my good friend Derek Nimmer had played in the original with Anna Neagle. As I am actually a little bit older than Derek Nimmer, who is now unfortunately no longer with us, and he always on Just a Minute used to send me up about my age, I was rather delighted to be able to play the part he had created 20 years later, and sort of saying, "Sucks to you about age, good friend Derek." Yes, that was at the Victoria Palace. Cyd Charisse came over, who was a legend from the musical cinema, and she was still extremely well preserved and did a most wonderful number with a male dancer who I shared a dressing room with, actually. Brilliant performer. And she wasn't the top actress for a stage musical. She was great in the musicals and cinema where you had short scenes, but to sustain a scene with her, she was a lovely, lovely lady, and it was a joy to work with a legend. And I suppose what was memorable about it, I had done a lot of pantomime, and I did a rather eccentric thing in one pantomime, which I played the dame. I put on a pair of roller skates, and I came on as a skating dame, which made a huge impact. So I had the skates, and I was playing the part of this chap who comes to tell Paul Nicholas, who played the lead, who's in love with Charlie girl, and he's working at the house, the big stately home, come to tell him that he's won the football pools, and I'm the man from the pools. I was enamoured of one of the other girls there, and this is the character, and was keen to stay on, so he takes on the job of the butler. But I wasn't a conventional butler, because I came from a different background of butlers, and I was quite an eccentric butler. And this isn't the story I'm talking about. And I said to the producer, the director, I said, you know, in this ballroom scene where they're all doing the waltz, and he comes on with a tray of champagne, would it be quite an amusing idea if I came on in roller skates? And that's exactly what he said. And he said, how would it work? I said, I don't know, it's going to be rather difficult, because it's not easy to skate, because I'd learned to roller skate, but I mean, every stage has what's called a rake, and it slopes. And so when you go upstage, you have to skate up. But when you come back, you freewheel, really, and you have to balance that. And as these people were moving about, and I did something which I put in my autobiography, which I would never have the courage to do now, I don't think. But I had a feeling it would work. But we got very behind, as you often do in a musical, with all the music and the choreography and everything. And we were having these tech runs, as they're called. And I kept saying to whichever the producer, who was not as experienced as some music producers, I said, what about the skating? He said, oh, we'll come to it, Nick, don't worry, we'll come to it. And we got to the final tech run, and I thought, we haven't done it. And I know it's going to be difficult. And he said, well, don't worry, we can always put it in after the show's opened. Now, I've been in the business long enough to know that never happens.
Yes. Things come out, but not
And so I thought, I'm going to do it. So when we got to that number in this particular tech run, I've only got my skates put on, and I said to the musical director, who's a very nice man, I said, by the way, on this one, I'm going to do the skating. Is it been cleared? I said, I'm not sure, I think so, but don't worry, I'm going to do it. I said, anyway, if there's any problems, it's my fault. He said, Nick, I wouldn't do it for anybody else, but I'll do it for you. Okay. I said, just keep the music going, and they'll go on dancing, and I'll come on, but it'll be a bit longer than usual because I'm on roller skates. And my heart was beating. I thought, this is absolutely outrageous. What am I doing? And so I just sailed on, and bless his heart, he was a good friend. He kept the waltz going, and the couples kept dancing. They were absolutely mystified, because suddenly, in the middle of this waltz, this ballroom waltz, I came on with the tray of it, which was even different. I had the glasses stuck, the champagne glasses, to the tray, just for safety, because you couldn't spill water on the stage. Nothing in them. I came on saying, champagne, champagne, who wants champagne? And skated in and out behind them. And thank God I didn't hit any of them. And they looked quite mystified. They kept dancing, and I shot off again. And then we came to the end of that scene, and it was right, cut. And then Harold Fielding, who was the impresario presenting it, came to the end of the stage, and I thought I was going to be told off or even fired. And he said, I haven't seen that before. I said, I know, we've been very busy, we haven't had time to fit it in before. He said, it's brilliant. Keep it in. Fantastic. And so it was in. I was a bit, and if the director didn't have the courage to put it in, knowing that, and actually it got a lot of notice, and people mentioned it because it was so eccentric and different and funny.
It sounds immediately funny, and I wasn't even there.
Right, there we are.
You were working with Dora Bryan in there.
Oh, darling Dora, yes. Dora and I have known each other since her days in repertory at the Coliseum Theatre in Oldham, and then she did little bits and pieces in the West End, was I doing little bits and pieces, and we've been mates and friends over the years. Our careers have bumped, and we've worked very little together, but we're always bumping into each other and very fond of each other. And so this was a great joy now to work with her in this musical. And of course she is what I call a natural comedienne. I mean, like Tommy Cooper was. Tommy just had to talk and you laughed. And Dora has a way of delivering lines that makes you laugh. And she was outstandingly funny. And we had one scene in that where I am supposed to demonstrate to her and Cyd Charisse yoga, because it's very good for the things. And I'm supposed to be a yoga expert, this character I played. And we got down, and Dora is entirely double-jointed, even at that age, and she was getting on then. She could do splits and all kinds of things. And so, I mean, this went down very well with the audience, and And we were very naughty. We built the comedy in that scene, and we rather indulged ourselves, I'm afraid. And Paul Nicholas said, it's good to have the laughs, because he's the star of the show. But he said, I think you mustn't get too indulgent. Just, get the laughs and move on, which is, of course, the right way to do it. Dora, I think, got so carried away, she didn't always move on. And I must say, when we went out later to Manchester, where we indulged as well, and then on to Birmingham, when we got to do a season in Birmingham, they decided to cut the scene.
Oh.
I think we were naughty, and we probably deserved it.
And in Charlie Girl, you also sang a song called I Ate's Money, is that right?
That's right. Well, I did it in I'm not a singer. I sing. By the way, in case anybody listening now or wonder what the noise is, it's not some terrible aged rumble I've got. It's raining now, because we're up at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and we're under an umbrella, and you can hear the rain pitter-pattering on the umbrella. So, yes, well, I did as a duet with Paul Nicholas, and Paul was a very good singer, and I just have difficulty working with music, but I get away with it.
Moving on, if I may, to Into the Woods, which is where I first saw you in musical theatre, 1989 with Julia McKenzie, a Stephen Sondheim musical, and you were, you do sing again in that, Ever After, I think.
Yes, Happy Ever After. I never thought I'd ever be in a Sondheim musical. And I remember how I got the job. I was up in St Andrews, where I was the rector of the university, and I'd gone up there, and then I had the court meeting, and I had 2 days. I thought, well, for once I go up there, I got 2 days clear, I could enjoy St Andrews as a town and talk to the students, maybe even get a game of golf, which I'd never had all the time I was doing my duties as rector. And I was going to stay on for the graduations. And they said, well, they'd like you to come down and meet Richard Jones, who's directing it. And I thought, well, I don't think I'm right for Sondheim. And I read the thing, and she said, well, it's going to be a big number, and I think you should go. And I didn't even know the number of names. I don't know all of them, but the names that were considering for this role was quite amazing. Everybody from Bob Monkhouse inwards, outwards, and upwards. There's some very big names they wanted for the role of the narrator, and I was one of them in the frame. This is show business. It's a very interesting thing. Sometimes jobs you particularly want and think you're absolutely right for, somebody else gets them. I never mind if that other person's talented, because you think, well, that's the luck of the draw. But they're not so talented and not so right. You do feel a bit niffed. And other jobs you get very nervous about, and you don't think you're right for, and worried whether you can do them. And I thought, well, shall I even bother to go down? But in the end I thought, well, I went and got the train from Lucas and went all the way down to the Aberdonian to London, stayed the night, went to saw him next day, and the next afternoon I had to go back on the train up to St Andrews. And in the morning I went down to the Old Vic and I met Richard Jones. And now, Richard is an amazingly talented man, and he's one of these people who must work a lot by instinct. He obviously had the idea, he'd seen me work and heard of my work, and had an idea that I would be right for the role. He must have felt that. But I chatted to him. He didn't ask me to read it even. We just chatted and talked. And we talked about, just a minute, we talked about Kenneth Williams, whom he's a great admirer of. We talked about this, that and the other. We talked about my career, which I thought was a very intelligent way of doing an audition.
Unusual.
And I went and got on the train, and I thought, well, I didn't even read anything. Mind you, with a Sondheim musical, there's very little you can read. And there was no music there to try and live it. So I get back, and the next day my agent phoned. She says, you've got the job. I said, but can I do it? Because I fixed up to do this pantomime. And Billy Marsh, who was in the senior, as with his agency, Billy did a deal with the pantomime people. In other words, they bought me out. I had to pay for 2 weeks' salary or something. Well, you have to, because they've done all that publicity to promote the pantomime, and they have to find somebody else and pay all that money again and do the publicity again. It costs a lot of money, but it's only fair.
Of course.
I mean, they could have been nasty and said, I'm sorry, he's under contract. Stuff that. I don't mind he's got a better job or not. But they were understanding that it was an amazing thing to do, a Sondheim musical in the West End. And it is an amazing show. It was an amazing experience. I was flattered and thrilled to be in it. I did have difficulty with the music. The assistant musical director was so patient. He used to take me off and give me special private lessons, trying to get Happy Ever After doing it. And I obviously musically got away with it. And I realised how much I got away with it when I read a review some months after the show had finished, and the LP was out. They had LPs in those days. This fellow was reviewing the LP and said that he enjoyed it very much. But he said that he was very impressed with Nicholas Parsons when he saw him in the show. But listening to him on the record, I realised he isn't much of a singer.
Oh.
which was true. I'm not much of a singer.
I saw that show and I really enjoyed it, and I loved the way you played that character. You were the narrator.
That's right.
And
yes.
You got a lot of laughs as well, if I may say, particularly in the second act, I think.
I got some chuckles, yes. Well, if you worked all your life in comedy, in my autobiography, which I called The Straight Man, My Life in Comedy, you know how to deliver a line and get the humour out of it. Sometimes people think playing for laughs is that you're saying gag lines. But people will laugh at the humorous way in which you deliver something.
Which is the acting again.
That's the acting. That's the entirely acting. But then again, there are some comics who are great actors, like Tony Hancock. Tony was an amazing performer. But if you listen to him, it was just the intonation he gave to some of the perfectly legitimate straight line. I tell you one person I greatly admired was a supreme example of that. Ronnie Barker.
Oh, indeed.
Now, Ronnie was an actor. He was a comedy actor. And he would never do stand-up, anything like that. He wasn't a gag man. But Ronnie's characterizations were so brilliant and they were so funny. You just laughed at the way Ronnie delivered those lines because he interpreted them. He found the humour within the line which made you roar with laughter. It's a very subtle thing, incredibly subtle. Comedy is so subtle. I've said before, the art of acting is timing, and the art of comedy acting is more sophisticated timing. And that sums up comedy.
That's a very good line, if I may say. Can I briefly talk about Julia McKenzie in the show?
Oh, please do. Darling Julia, Stephen Sondheim was always a great admirer of Julia's and felt that she interpreted his songs and music better than anybody. I'd heard him say, in fact, he told me that. And she'd been in nearly all his music. She's a member of the Sondheim Society, and I think she's their president or patron. And she's a brilliant performer. She's a brilliant actress too. But she was at her best, I think, in Sondheim.
And may we move on just briefly, staying with Sondheim for just a minute, because this year you were involved...
Stay with him as long as you like, because I'm the greatest admirer of his work, and they've now made me a member of the Sondheim Society, because I did a big charity show for Childline as one of the charities to support, and we did it about 2 years ago, it was now, at Theatre Royal Drury Lane, and two very clever lads, Doug Pynchon and Bob Marsh, they got the idea and they got the theatre, and they needed me and my contacts. They wanted me to be in it, but my contacts with the charities to see if the charity would take it on board and help promote it. Because, remember, you're paying out a hell lot of money for the theatre, and there's a hell lot of money for orchestrations and orchestra and so forth. And so, you have to clear... expenses can come up to 30,000-40,000. So you've got to make at least 100,000 plus in order to get a substantial income for the charity. And one charity was very nervous and wouldn't go with it. Childline went with it courageously, and we took the title because it was very apt, and it was for Childline, Children Will Listen. It was one of my favourite numbers from Into the Woods. And Children Will Listen, Childline have these phone lines that any child feels threatened, disturbed, upset, bullied or anything like that can phone up on this hotline, totally private, and there's counsellors on the other end to help them, and if it's really serious, into the social services and things like that. So it was a perfect title for the show, and we had some wonderful people singing all the wonderful songs from all the different Sondheim musicals. Bill Deemer, who's a brilliant choreographer and director, did it and put it all together in about 2 weeks. And the orchestra and everything were wonderful. It was all done, and it was all really, the dress rehearsal was just one solid day on the Sunday, and then you do it at night, and it all came together, and it was everybody said, "My God, it should have been filmed. Why wasn't it?" Usually, and it was a great evening. Very proud to be associated with it, and I did some comparing and inserts in the thing, and what I was very flattered about was when I came on to be involved in one number, I started off by saying, "Once upon a time," and of course all the Sondheim fans in the audience recognised it immediately from Into the Woods, and which was very flattering that they remembered after so long. And we did. I think we made about £80,000 for the charity. A lot of hard work for nothing, but it's worth it. And the show, well, especially when if you do anything in show business, and it's successful, you're thrilled and delighted. In this case, it was for charity, but it's nice to do that and make some money. But as long as it's successful.
And you were involved in the very successful Follies concert this year at the Palladium.
That's right, yes, but I was doing that. It's because I'm now working with Doug and Richard, who again put it all together, and I just went on and did a bit of comparing and made the appeal for the charity. And they said to me, rather strange thing which never struck me before, but you're so good at that. What does it mean? I'm so good at making appeals.
I can answer that, because when you came on, before you'd said a word, there was a rapturous applause. I was very lucky to be there. Yes.
Oh, you were there. Oh, they recognised me, so that was good. Yes.
I think it's more than recognition, if I may say. I think there's genuine national warmth for you.
Well, it's nice to hear that. It's nice to think that. I must say, the reaction I get up here at the Edinburgh Fringe when I walk on the beginning, the warmth from that audience is quite inspiring. It really sets the adrenaline going, because sometimes you're on the go, because I have guests in my show up here, so I always go and see their shows, and on average I'm seeing 3 other shows a day, as well as doing my own, and having to meet people who want to interview me for podcasts and YouTubes and God knows that. And so you get somewhat tired and you think, oh God, can I hack it tonight? But you go out there and that audience gives you that warmth of reception, and it sets the old adrenaline going, and suddenly you're no longer tired. Mind you, feel twice as tired afterwards.
May we talk briefly about your, I think, very well-known involvement with the Rocky Horror Show, which you've already touched upon?
That's another interesting story too, because, again, as I said to you before, like Into the Woods, it's an amazing thing about showbiz. Often the jobs you don't want, the ones you want. I sometimes wonder whether producers and employers, when they see somebody, if he sees too keen to get the job, they think, oh, he needs it, and they don't. And somebody comes on who's not really committed to it and wonders whether he should do it, and then they seem to want him. Because this was another example of that. This was the 21st anniversary revival of the Rocky Horror Show, and it was scheduled after a tour to come in to the Duke of York's Theatre in St Martin's Lane. And my agent phoned me and they said they'd like you to take over the role of the narrator. They seemed to think I was more suited to the chap they had. And so I thought, well, I'd better go and see the show. And I chose, unfortunately for me, to go and see it at the Forum, Kentish Town.
Oh, yes.
I don't know whether you know it, but it is really a rock venue. And literally, I don't know why they booked it, because they had some seats in what would be the dress circle. It was an old cinema, but the ground floor is a rock venue. So the audience were just standing there and playing Rocky Horror. Right, they get away with it, and they've got a business. But the crowd just was shouting along and singing along, and you could hardly hear a word. And I thought, my God, I can't get. That's not my scene. I'm not known. And I phoned my agent up and I said, I saw it. I said, I don't think it's quite my scene. I don't think I could cope with all that. And she said, well, they're very keen to have you because you have quite a cult following with the younger generation, and it is a cult show, and and I think you could do the part well, and you haven't been in the West End for a while, and I've got you quite good billing, and I've got you quite a nice salary. So I said, I'll do the job. Because in show business we like to work. And again, you assess what's involved, and you use your experience from the past to find a way to interpret the role you're doing, which is right for the show and also presumably right for yourself. And I know that I did take the role of the narrator in a slightly different direction. And the producer at the time was very understanding about it, because when I first went on, the narrator, as you know, the regulars send him up rotten. And in the past, the narrator's been he's very formally dressed, for those who don't know the Rocky Horror Show, in a crushed velvet jacket and looking very smart and sophisticated. And in contrast to all the people in the different numbers. And it's been traditional amongst the fans who shout out certain things which have become almost traditional, that the narrator is sent up as boring. And other narrators had just accepted it and just said the words and gone off uncomfortably. Others just got through it as quick as possible, went off the take with you. But I wasn't going to stand there and have people shout out, boring, boring, get off, piss off, boring, boring. I'm not going to... It's because I've done a lot of stand-up comedy. I'm not going to stand there and be insulted. So I waited till they ring, and I started ad-libbing back to them.
Excellent.
and of course the fans loved this. And then I did ad-lib back to them. They started thinking, when they came again, of other things to throw at me, and I ad-libbed back to them. And I built a sort of interplay, and I never, which is the thing I'm most proud of, I never had any audience from then on say boring, except when I went on the provinces. But after the first performance, and I dealt that, and I managed to put that down. And I think I used to twist it round, and I said, yes, I think you are very boring, and I'd shut up if I were you. And if you want to shout anything else, I'm quite happy, but let me get on with it. I would gag. And I remember the producer, Leon said to me, he said, Nicholas, you are a little self-indulgent in that first entrance, but he said, as long as you are disciplined from then on. And I said, yes, you're right. Professionally, I can see that. But I said, it helps me to make a rapport with the audience. He said, it's wonderful. You make that rapport with the audience, which is also good for the show. But I said, then from then on, I won't, and I didn't. But I was just, that first entrance, I had a lot of fun. And I grew to like it very much. And of course, I introduced a gimmick which has become part of the show ever since. Because I said to our director, I said, I don't know how I heard, I was at my idea, I thought I heard it happen. I said, in the end, when they're all doing the big finale number, the floor show, and they've all slightly fallen out of character, and they're all dressed in the fishnet tights and high-heeled shoes and suspender belts and the busks and everything, and then this blends into the finale, and then the narrator comes on at the end and takes his bow in the finale number. And I said, do you think it might be an amusing idea if, when I come on at the end, I appear to have joined the gang, and I also was dressed the same as everybody else? And he looked at me incredulously and said, Nicholas, would you really? And I said, well, I think it might get quite a laugh. He said, I think it'll bring the house down. So we did this. In fact, what we did, we compromised. Kept the jacket on, but from then on, you could see the suspender belts and the high-heel shoes and the things. And it was such a contrast to the way I'd been previously. It did get a wonderful reaction. And it's been so successful, they've kept it in every production of the Rocky Horror Show ever since. I should have said, that's my idea, I've contributed. If you repeat it, I want a little mini royalty. But you don't think like that. Anyway, no, so I did this. It was a great... But the irony, actually, of that is that we fellas don't think about our legs because they're enclosed in trousers most of the time. And girls' legs are very much a part of the feminine culture, isn't it? And we photograph girls with lovely legs and we remark on their lovely legs. But of course some men have quite good legs. And apparently I'm one of them, which I was never aware of before. And you put on the fishnet tights and the high heels, it emphasises it. And people would come round afterwards and say to me, oh, I did enjoy it. I said, I've got to congratulate you. I really must congratulate you. And I was waiting for a nice compliment about my show, about my performance. And they said, you've got very good legs. And I thought I'd flog myself all through the show and all I remember is the bloody legs. So anyway, it was a great show to be in. I got very attached to the show, and it's tremendous fun. There's a wonderful atmosphere about it, and it's wonderful doing a show where you've got such a wonderful audience participation. I mean, here I show up here in Edinburgh. I ad-lib with the audience to begin with and do a whole routine with them and gag with them and encourage them to interplay with me, and I'm happy with that. So I'm used to working interactively like that, and so it was a little bit, I always thought Rocky Horror was like a very sophisticated, outrageous pantomime in the sense that the premise, not the writing, because I mean Richard O'Brien's writing is so brilliant. I mean, and I think the man's a mini genius to have created that show which goes on and on. It's out of the tour at moments somewhere, I think, yes. So many people have played it. I mean, and you know, Frankenfurter is a character that anybody can take that role if they can sing and dance a bit and interpret it in any way which is individual to them. I mean, I've worked with about half a dozen different Frankenfurters, and they were all different. I mean, Jason Donovan, who was a little bit over the top, but he was fantastic. Jonathan Morris was much more of an actor's approach to it. He was very good as well. Robin Cousins, surprisingly enough, he did it as well. And Darren Day, surprisingly, was very good. And but I've worked with some great Frankenfurters and some other fantastic people. And do you know, it's I always think it's very sad. You see it up here in Edinburgh. There is so much talent up here. I go around and see all these other shows because so many of them are guests on mine. In fact, last year when I was up, I worked out 48 shows.
Cool.
By the time I finished this year, I was seeing over 50 shows. And I see so much talent. Some of it slightly immature, but some of it very mature and experienced talent. And there's so much talent, so much comedy talent. And you look at the television, you see how little of it's there. Because so much is now reality shows, people shows, because they get the ratings and they're much cheaper. And it's very sad. And when you think of all the people who come into our profession every year from our drama schools, and they've trained, and they're talented, there's lots of young talented people about. And in each production of the Rocky Horror Show, it's always been a superb cast. And some of those youngsters, I mean, there's two of them I keep in touch with now, and one of them hasn't done any work since, and she was brilliant. One of them, who was very talented, had been in 3 different productions I did, which is Laurie Brett. Then Laurie suddenly gets a break, and she's now in EastEnders. But it's lovely to think that somebody who has got that great talent can get that break, but then she becomes a household name. But she's a great singer, you know. But this is it. And so many of them go in, they shine, and of course the show finishes, and then they're often working paper rounds or something until they get the next job. And it's not that they're limited talent. There is a lot of talent around, and there's not a lot of work for it. Even though there's a lot of shows out on the tour and everywhere else, and there's a lot of things on television, but you see, it's a vastly overcrowded profession. When you consider that our union Equity estimates that I think something like 87% of our profession is always unemployed. Can you think of it? 87% unemployment. And there's only about 10% earn a living wage. Unfortunately, there's 2 or 3% who earn ridiculous sums of money, as happens everywhere, in sport and in the media and advertising and God knows where. And everybody writes about those few. And of course, they're taking a lot of the cream off the top, so there's less money to spend on other things. And it's rather sad. But that's the profession now, and that's the profession. But I love it, and I love the people in it. And I just get a little sad to think that not more of the very talented people I see around are not good, they get good work, not getting regular work.
Thank you, Nicholas. Just to conclude, I'd like to talk briefly about your show here in Edinburgh Fringe. You have the best poster here, a picture of you on a camel, resplendent in your fantastic red blazer, and the show, because it's been running for 8 years, has its own reputation already. It's almost as established as the Fringe in some ways, it feels.
Well, that's very flattering, and thank you very much. And I'm glad you like the poster, because I knew it was a bit outrageous, and then my show's a bit outrageous, or I'm a bit outrageous in the show, put it that way. And I thought, let's do something a bit different. And the very clever artist came up with that, and it appealed to me, and I thought, well, is it going to get the message across? But it looks a bit, it looks hot and exciting. Last year I had myself sitting on an iceberg. But then, psychologically, it looked cool, but it was the wrong kind of cool. Or it might be a bit of a cold show. But that looks warm. I'm glad you like it, because, you think of something. Well, in this case it was a combination of the artist came up with a drawing of the pyramids in the background of the camel and me squatting on it. And of course you can do so much with super animation in computers and things. So put me from a photo shoot I did sitting down on a chair, take it out and put me on the top of a camel in a very laid back way. I think I've got a glass in my hand too.
You do, yes. It's the full martini man.
That's right, yes. Because I sport the cravat, and I just like the cravat. And once I was doing a show which was different, and the producer, whom I got very friendly with, he said, "Why do you wear a cravat?" And I thought, well. And it was a late night show for youngsters called Night Network.
Oh yes.
It was all pop singers and singers on, and it went out from sort of 12 midnight to 2 o'clock in the morning. And I did a ridiculous quiz show called the all new alphabet game, what we called the trivia quiz. And there were all these pop people, so I got a following amongst the pop people, the pop followers, which built up my reputation as a cool guy in the youth culture. I put on the cravat, and he said, I like it. So I've always worn it ever since. I've always had cravats, I've always liked them. And I thought maybe I'll start a new trend of fashion. Nobody's followed, but I'm not worried now, because I thought, no, then that is me. If nobody wants to follow, I can be on my own with my cravats.
I'd like to know where you get your red blazer from, though, if your taste in blazers is known across the country.
Well, I have lots of blazers. I love them. I go into shops if I find a blazer which is different. I got one recently. Where was it? In an unusual shop. It was actually near Simpsons, because I had to go and get a new a tuxedo for a smart cabaret show that I was doing, because my other white one was getting a bit worn. I went in, and my wife was with me. She said, look at some of these blazers, darling, and she's got a very good eye for clothes. I said, I quite like that one. She said, yeah, try it on. Oh, I said, I like it. And I said, but listen, I don't need it. She said, it's good. And it's one of my favourites. So you find blazers which are distinctive and have a style. So, and I wear different ones in different nights up here. I've got the red one, as you mentioned. I've got the one which is a Henley blazer, which is very striking. I've got a more subtle one. I've got a fawn one. And I've got this new one. I've got lots of blazers at home, but no, they're not over the top. There's that subtle difference between being striking but not flamboyant, you know what I mean? And I like to think, and with the cravat, I like to think I strike the difference. I suppose I never used to be interested in clothes until I did a quiz show, and I had to have different clothes for every show. So you start to take an interest in how you dressed. Up till then, I just had to make conventional suits and things like that. But now I do take an interest in clothes, and I think it's fun. And because nowadays you get the contrast, because the youngsters either, as I said right at the beginning of the chat, dress down, which you can. You can walk about in your shorts and a t-shirt and so forth. And some performers work in just slacks and t-shirt. Great. You know, we are so broad in our attitude and acceptance, you can work in what you like. Or you can dress up. And I think you don't get anything in between. You either get someone who puts on clothes which would be considered smart. I like being smart casual, which is something in between. And because the other one is to be a bit grungy, but which is very popular. But I think you can be smart and casual. And I've just seen, I got a remark on it because I haven't seen it before. We're here at the Festival Fringe, and a seagull has flown in. Has flown in and just picked up some stuff. How do they get the message around that the Festival Fringe is on and the bloody seagulls are now coming up from the coast down at Leith? And they say we can go there because we can pick up some nice little tidbits.
Chips on the floor.
So it's amazing how word of mouth at the Festival Fringe gets around, because you'll find the shows which are good and popular and successful, word of mouth fills them. And the ones that are less so, it's they're not always so full.
Finally, what next for Nicholas Parsons, that most stylish of men?
Well, we've got Just a Minute. We haven't mentioned Just a Minute, have we? Because it's on at the moment on Mondays at 6:30 and Sundays at 12 o'clock. And then there'll be the next series they're talking, which is the 40th anniversary series. Yeah. And then when I go back, I've got, it's in the diary, I've got a couple of one-off shows to do. I've got my Edward Lear show, which is a cultural one, which I'm doing. We've got a couple of venues to do that, one in Wales and one somewhere else. And then I'm going like on a cruise ship. I do quite a lot of cruising these days because I've got 3 different shows I can do, which is good. Yes. And that's at the end of the month for 2 weeks. I've been engaged to go on Desert Island Discs after having waited 50 years, which is, I'm really thrilled about that because that's a cult show. And it's in the diary, I know, because somebody said, are you going to take a holiday? And I said, yes, I should, but I looked at the diary, and not every day, but, you know, there's 2 or 3 or 4 engagements in every week of September right till the end. But I will relax on the cruise because I'm only doing 4 shows, and I'm there for 3 weeks. Oh, 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks.
Now, your Lear show is called How Pleasant to Know Mr. Lear.
That's right, yes.
And I just wanted to say how pleasant it has been to talk to Mr. Nicholas Parsons. So, Mr. Parsons, Nicholas, thank you so much.
Don't put the Mr. in. You know that's a very American. And people do it in order to please and flatter. I am concerned about the Americanisms that keep into our style. Because they haven't got any way of flattering people with honours in America, if they want to flatter somebody over there, they say, Mr. Nicholas Parsons. And I think, in a way, it takes away. I'd rather be known as Nicholas Parsons when introduced rather than Mr. Nicholas Parsons. If they don't know I'm a bloody Mr., then there's something wrong.
You are also a Dr. Parsons.
I'm also a Dr. Parsons, and I'm also, you remind me what I'm doing, I know one of the other things I'm doing, I'm going to get another doctorate degree from Lincoln University, which will be sometime in September. But from my work at St Andrews University, which I mentioned earlier on, as rector there, they honoured me with a Doctor of Laws, and in fact the university always write to me as Dr. Parsons. In fact, you can call me Dr. Parsons if you like, but if you don't want to put the doctor in, which I think is a bit superfluous, just call me Nicholas.
Nicholas, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for your generous time and for being such a wonderful interviewee.
Well, it's been a joy talking to Thomas, and I hope the people listening have enjoyed it.
I can almost guarantee that.
Musical talk. There we are, the late, great Nicholas Parsons. It was a joy for me to revisit this conversation as I re-edited it for this programme. And I must reiterate my gratitude, but in many ways I credit that conversation that you've just heard with Nicholas Parsons as the beginning of my learning how to interview people properly. I didn't get it right there all the time, but from there I went on and I hadn't really stopped. One final memory of Nicholas Parsons from that time I met him. On the morning I was to meet him, I made my way to the venue, the open-air Pleasance Courtyard, and it was sufficiently early that there actually weren't many people around. Edinburgh doesn't really sort of wake up during the festival until about 11 a.m, and we were meeting, I think, at 10. But Nicholas had his show that year, Nicholas Parsons' Happy Hour, taking place at the Pleasance, and so he had stopped off in the organisational office to pick up his box office returns for that day and for the days to come. And then he came to join me at the table. Now, the thing I remember most is that he was very old until you turned the microphone on. At that time, he was walking quite slowly, and whilst I wouldn't say he was frail, you could certainly see he was an old man. He wasn't sprightly in any way. And then he asked me if he could just spend a few minutes looking over his papers, and that's exactly what he did. He was checking his paperwork and his sales figures. Very much the businessman, very much focused on real life. And of course, a money-making exercise, which musical talk isn't. If my memory is right, I don't think he was absolutely delighted by the figures that he saw, although, as usual, his shows always sold out, but sometimes at the last minute. But he turned off his bad mood the moment I turned on my microphone. And then the Nicholas Parsons we all know and that you've just heard suddenly came alive. I would say, given the fact he was an actor primarily, that Nicholas Parsons had identified and developed a character that he used in real life. Not too far removed from who he was, but more up, more vibrant, more sprightly, the very thing he didn't appear to me when we first met. It was quite a revelation that he seemed so remarkably different from the informal Nicholas and then the professional Nicholas, which I saw in short succession. There we are, just an observation about one individual, but an individual who has touched British cultural life for over 70 years, and we will miss him, and I certainly will, because, as I say, he launched my musical talk interviewing career. For better or for worse, that's for you to decide. And I don't need an answer immediately, I'm going to give you time to think about it, because I'm going to sign off for this week. Do join us again on Musical Talk in the next few weeks, and indeed after that, as we bring you a variety of different programmes about different musicals. But for the time being, all I can say is goodbye. And to prove that's all I can say, I'm now going to say it repeatedly. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos. Copyright Musical Talk 2020. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk, or subscribe to us on iTunes, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos.